49. The last president inaugurated in the United States. The span of terrible days after the global comms blackout when the world was reshaped. The number of strange supernatural phenomena that appear around the globe. You're listening to The 49, the new series by Andrew Kooman. Get the content right in your inbox when you subscribe at the49.substack.com. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Welcome to the world of The 49.
He wouldn't flinch. His face would remain neutral. He would be in full command of his body. He wouldn't give the unseen audience or the Gov one more candid or personal moment. This is what he told himself as he sat alone in the quiet room. The silence was absolute. It was like a sensory chamber in that regard. No sounds but the beating of his heart, a rapid thunk, thunk, thunk in his ears. The temperature in the room was perfect. He was neither cold nor warm. Even though he sat on a metal chair in his boxer shorts and the white shirt that was the sign of a contestant. There had been no more drugs since they pulled him off the set, but the fog was still there. He couldn't keep track of time. How long had he been in custody? How long since he last saw David? And Annie, was she in a room just like this, just like him, waiting? Her jaw would be proudly set. She wouldn't flinch. He knew that, but nothing could prepare him for the moment. His hands were secured to his side, clamped to the chair. This was less for security than to ensure he couldn't cover his face, so the camera got what it wanted, what it needed. Despite all the inward coaching and coaxing, his heart dropped to the floor. The door opened suddenly. The unnatural chime of an alarm rang as it slid open, and the sound of air transferring from the carefully controlled space that rushed out the door created a light wind that pulled at his hair and sent shivers across his body. There was no one there for a beat. He knew it must be because the cameraman was racking his shot, punching into his face, that the cameras hidden around him out of sight were set in focus for the angle over his shoulders in the overhead shot. And he could sense in his body a flood of endorphins, as though all his senses were being aroused. Maybe they had given him drugs. He never felt so alive. He sucked in a breath of surprise as he heard movement. He had made that same gasp of air when he stood at the altar years ago, his hands folded in front of him as he rocked on his heels in leather shoes and waited for Annie to appear to walk down the aisle. How strange that he'd think all this, camera shots, his wedding day, in the moment when he would discover his fate. And then the man emerged. The way the light shone from above the door, it was as though he materialized like an apparition. First a foot, then a face. Dark pools of shadow and the sharp angles of his eyes and cheeks. And just as he appeared in full, a reflection of light from the object at the center of his body nearly blinded Jonas. He squinted and leaned back in the chair. Suddenly, the dazzle of light diminished and Jonas opened his eyes. There, before him, stood a man in his underwear with a cross looped around his neck. He was in his mid-40s, maybe. Hard to tell these days, sharp angles, jawline, nose, the bishop. Jonas laughed. That's a first, the man said. There was something about his eyes. Unbroken. I've never had someone laugh before. I'm the bishop. You can call me Diez. Jonas smirked at this. Or you can call me nothing at all. By now, the door had closed. The bright production suddenly dimmed after the cameras captured the last image, a confessional booth appearing slowly from the floor, rising into place. The restraints holding Jonas to the chair released, and Diez, in a well-practiced move, pointed to the door. He stepped behind it, disappeared from camera, and the audience's last image of Jonas was of him, standing, looking around him, deciding whether or not to enter the booth. The single light of a naked bulb above them shone warm light. These are your last moments of life on this earth, and I am, for better or for worse, who you'll spend them with. For what it's worth, I want you to know I'm sorry that you're here. Sorry? Yes, Diez said, convincingly. Why? That they've done this to you, that you've known this injustice and humiliation, that you've been used in this way as a sacrifice to a failed system that needs sacrifices to stay in control. Jonas instinctively looked up to the corners of the booth to where he imagined. The cameras watched. Who was this man? They got what they wanted. They're already editing it for tonight's recap. This isn't being recorded. You can be sure of that. It's part of the deal. What deal? With the governor? No cameras, no recording. You have total freedom to say anything you want in here. This is your last confession, and I can give you last rites if you desire them. The man looked at him for a moment, unflinching. Who made that deal? I did. What leverage do you have over the gov? He asked. Trust me? None. Trust you? The man rubbed his temples and leaned against the wall of the booth. You expect me to confess to a crime I didn't commit? Is that it? Some people do when they realize that this is really it. And others, some curse at me to offload. That makes most sense. How infuriating it must be. The rage, the helplessness is what I imagine I'd do. I tune in to watch that. A priest cussing out. That'd be good TV. Diez laughed. It probably would. I'm not really a priest, you should know. I'm honest with everyone about that. Diez turned his head and looked at the man through the semi-transparent grate that separated them. Not in the way most people think of a priest, at least. I was a journalist. I covered the priesthood and Anglican part-time. A Pentecostal for some of it, if you believe me. Oh, now Jonas looked away. Well, aren't the Cardinals a little pissed about that? They always seem pissed about everything, not the ones who are still alive. Wartime faith. Back to basics. How did you end up repping the church? It's a long story. I was there. For the first falls, Jonas's head snapped back to Diez. The Bishop of Masquas handed this to me before he died, and the Gov, he was there too. What? Jonas looked back at the bishop again. I told you it was a long story. Diez took off the cross. He slid open the slat so he could see Jonas clearly and passed the crucifix between him over the metal barrier. Jonas took it and held it. It was weighty. I had someone I love very much die too. Someone I was supposed to protect, Diez said. Well, look at us. Jonas took the cross the bishop handed through the slat and held it in his hand. It was surprisingly light, though it looked weighty. A client I worked for had one just like it. A priest? Diez asked. My memory's still pretty fuzzy. Those drugs. Man, what did you do before your career as a game show contestant? Jonas laughed at this. I was a lawyer. He passed the crucifix back through the slat. That feels like more than 2 lifetimes ago. Diez looked at the man through the slat of the wall between them. He tried to imagine him in another context, sitting sideways on a bench in a Hyperloop on his way to work, at a baseball game in a previous life, on a bench in a park. How are my ratings on this episode? I don't know. They say they'll be high. I don't watch the game. Jonas laughed at this. Too good for it? Too disgusted? No one deserves this. Well, you don't know what I'm in for. You don't have to tell me, Diez assured. I don't know what I'm in for. I didn't know the last time either. I'm here to listen. They said I killed my son. His voice cracked as he uttered the words. I knew that. I heard that. Diez admitted. But it's impossible? Jonas stared at Diez. Neither man looked away. That's the only thing I know that's true.
Thanks for listening to this portion of The 49 by Andrew Kooman. New content drops for paid subscribers every Monday at the49.substack.com. That's the49.substack.com. On Tuesdays, we release new audio on all your favorite podcast platforms. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe and to share it with a friend. Thanks for listening to The 49.